Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Decryption and I hope you are well. So every so often I post some polls or some quizzes to my community section, and one of the ones I posted recently that actually took me by quite a shock was this one here 5 days ago. Have you ever used Unreal's automated testing tools? The vast majority of people said they don't know what they are and that I should do a tutorial. So, I've recently been using them and I've really been enjoying them. So I think today will be a great tutorial to cover what they are, how to use them, and we'll do some real world examples. So let's get started. So, what are automated tests in Unreal? So if you imagine you've got a game, any size, and you have to do the repeated motions over and over and over again to test if something works. So when you're first starting the level, can you move forwards? Just a little thing like that. What if something's blocking you? What if you're surrounded by walls? What if you haven't been granted the ability to walk yet? You know, somebody's not giving you the gameplay ability. All stuff like that is stuff you have to test before your game goes out. You have to test the combat, you have to test the quest to see if people can die, you have to test if guards patrol points correctly, all stuff like that. So all these things you have to test before it goes out is going to take so much time for people to test. And you've got to think you're paying these people or yourself to do these tests. It could take hours for you to test every single scenario. What if you want it so if you fall into the void, you die? You need to test it. That's another thing you have to do. And there's all sorts of these things you need to make sure are covered and work. And this is where automated tests come in inside Unreal. You can code it to test and basically programmatically run things in your game, and then you can validate and check for the outcomes. So you could say, player spawn, walk off the edge, fall down, wait 10 seconds. Have they died? If they haven't died, fail the test. Because then you know they've not died when they've fallen off the edge. And then when you build your game, you can tell it to run these automated tests, and it will run every single one. It might take a while to run, so you might be better doing it overnight kind of thing, but if it catches anything, it will report it to you. Now, there are loads of different tests in no matter what you're doing, web design, games design, anything. There's all sorts of different branches of tests you can do. We're going to be looking at functional tests. It doesn't care what the map looks like. It could load in, and all of these could be Teletubbies or something. You want to catch that, but that's not what functional tests are for. Functional tests are testing functionality. So the player drops off, that's a function. They fall down, did they die? Functionality tests. And that's what we're going to be testing today. There are other tests in Unreal you can do. I've not looked at them yet, but functionality testing is great so far. I used it in one of my latest game jams, and I got it to test loads of things. So if the player ever stops shooting for whatever reason, I'm going to know straight away. So how do we start? So I'm actually going to move to a dev map, just because I think it's going to be far easier for us to do some basic stuff, but there's absolutely nothing stopping you creating tests for specific maps. So I'm going to come into my dev maps, and I'm just going to copy the medic minigame, because that'll work for me. And I'll call it m_testing. Yeah, I'll just call it m_testing, something like that. So all this map does is it has a medical cart that I've been working on, and it spawns the player in. That's pretty much it. So how do we get started making tests? So I'm going to come into my Unreal folder, and I'm going to go into my blueprints, and I'll just create a new folder, and I'll call it automated testing, and I'll go into it. It doesn't have to be called that, call it whatever you want. I'm going to make another one called functional tests, just because I do eventually want to try the other types of tests Unreal does. And we'll go to right click, blueprint, and I'm going to search in here for test. And you'll see we've got a bunch of my normal test stuff, but then you'll get to the good stuff, the functional test one here. So I'm just going to come and click the functional test, and I'll click select, and then right away I'll just call it FT for functional test _. Let's do a basic one. Let's just make the player move forwards. Can player move? And I'll open it up. So you'll see we've got this big weird ticket thing here already, which is just a decal of what the tests look like. Because this is a type of blueprint, you basically drag it into your world like so. So you can see right here, there's a functional test just placed there. In my game, I just had them scattered in a small circle, really. Didn't really do anything special. So on the functional test, if we go into the event graph, you've got prepare test, start test, and tick. So prepare test is the function that fires as soon as the test starts up, but before it actually starts running. So this is really, really useful for things you want to check if they exist first. You want to spawn some walls, trigger points, something like that. Event start test is when the test is actually ran and you're checking or setting up whatever you need to check, like the player's location and such like that. Event tick, you know what event tick is. That's it. So they're the three main events that you can call, and the only finish that you need to worry about is one called finish test, like so. You have to call finish test, otherwise it won't work. There is another way to finish a test, and that's an automatic timed fail. So if I click this test here, you can see I have this time limit, and this says how long you've got to actually finish the time. So preparation time is before it calls is ready. So it's wait for 15 seconds. I'm going to set this to 5. It doesn't need to be that long. And it'll wait for 20 seconds. After that, it will just fail automatically because it's waited too long. But on the finish test, you can call this manually with the result of what happens and the message for it to be printed out. So let's start. How are we just going to make the player move forwards? So I'm going to, on the prepare test, I will just get the player pawn. I will get their actor location. And then I will promote this to a variable, and I'll just say starting position, just like that. And I'll connect it up. Next, I will basically tell the test to start. So I'll come into the test start now we've stored that. So how do we replicate the player actually moving now? We don't just want to tell it to have an AI controller and move to a certain location, because that's not going to be realistic to the player playing the game. We need to functionally test that. They press a key, something happens. Outside of hardware issues, of course. So what I'm actually going to do is, instead of get player pawn here, I'm actually going to create a variable called character, and I'm going to set it to a type of pawn. And I'll make sure it's blueprint, it's instance editable. Then instead of the character here, I'm actually going to get the character's actor location. And then on the start test, I'm going to grab the character, and I'm going to tell it to add movement input. Now you might be wondering, why am I calling add movement input? What is this mystical function? This is one that's built into Unreal that most games will actually already use. So if I come and find the third person character, the basic one that comes with Unreal, same with the first person one, some of the functions that you may not have seen literally does this exact same thing. It calls add movement input. That's how you move forwards. And all it does is convert the X and Y value over to movement input. So we're going to tell it to move in a world direction. Which direction? Let's just see. Where are we? So that way is, if we click that one, the red is forwards in this case. So if we move it X, so we'll just say move, I don't know, we'll do 100 on the X direction. And well, yeah, let's see what happens, really. So we've ran this, we store the player's start position. Eventually, we'll calculate it, but let's actually see if we can get them moving first. We'll leave finish task up there just for now. So there are a couple of other things we need to change in the game. Firstly, you cannot be the player controller. That won't work in this case. If you need it to for some function stuff, we need to figure another way of doing it. But for the game mode, I'm going to come and set it to the functional test game mode, like so. You might be asking, how do we know which character to spawn in and stuff? We can do that by simply dragging our player in. So I want the ALS character BP. This is what my normal player normally is. So I'm going to make sure that his auto possess is turned off. We don't want him to be possessed by the player, like so. And we will also make sure that his input has been disabled like that. So he doesn't automatically receive input. He'll basically start there, we tell him what to do, and he'll go from there. We can even move him back a bit if we really want to. So if we click our test, we can now allocate it a character. So we'll just click this and pick our little player here. Boom. You can even make this not a pawn. You can make this anything really. You could make it the specific one. I'm doing a pawn just for generics. So how do we actually run this test? Because if we just play it, it's just going to play the level like normal. Look, I can move. I'm in spectator mode really, which means I can fly around as a camera, but nothing's happening. So we need to tell Unreal to run this automated test. And the good thing about this is it can basically run on any level really, as long as it can be completed. So I'm going to go to the tools and I'm going to go to session front end here. So when it loads up, I'm going to click automation. and then you can see all the different tests that are built into Unreal. So I'm going to make sure I've clicked my application here because you can run it on different devices. And if we find our project, you have the M testing here, the map testing, FT can player move. So I'm going to tick that and I'm going to click run. And what you will see is it will load up an editor here, and it's basically telling the player to move forwards. We can move around in it while the test's running. You can also run this headless so it's not taking up resource. But you see, the player's not moving for some reason. And eventually, when we get to 20 seconds or something, it will fail the test look. So you can see, finish test failed, time's up. So we ran out of time because the player's not moving. But that's how we run it. And you can run as many tests at once as you want. So why wouldn't this player move when we're giving him input? Because he wasn't even moving side to side either. So the reason this one's not working is I've put it on start test. So as soon as the start test loads, it immediately tells him to go forwards and stop straight away. Well, we don't want that. We instead want him to run on event tick, like so. And we can untick start test like so. So now, as soon as we start ticking this test, he should, in theory, start running. So we'll go back to session front end. We'll start it running. You can see he's moving forwards. And he stopped because he can't move forwards anymore. There we go. We've made the player move. But that's not so good at the moment because it'll fail again in a moment. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to tell somehow if the player's moving forwards. We could also tell him to test in different directions, really. So, how can we get if the player has moved over here? Well, you could technically spawn a trigger if you want of some kind, spawn a trigger point, he hits it, you call it all good. I've already got the location for this case, so I don't need to worry too much about that, because I can just tell if the distance between where the player started and where he ends up is different. Then I know he can move. So I'm going to come into the event tick here. As he's moving, I'm going to get his current location. And then I'm going to run a distance check on it. I'm going to add a distance vector node, and I'm going to plug in our starting position. Then I'm going to say, if this float is greater than, let's say 200, then I know wherever he started from and wherever he has ended up now is completely different by a factor of 200, then I know he's finished. So we can take this finish test, and we can plug it in down here like so. And we can set the test result to succeeded. The player moved. And we can hit compile and save. I can go back to my session front end and I can click run. Now you'll see the player will run. Oh, the player moved. We didn't even have time to turn around. Let's turn that number up a little bit, I think. Let's do 2000. So now we can come to the session front end. Now we should see the player move. Oh, okay, so we can't move that far then. Let's move the cart away so he's got more time to run. And I'm going to dock this message log because that's getting annoying. There we go. It's just telling us it failed, really. So can he move 2000? No, he can basically move like 600. So all I'm doing is moving the player from where he is to where he's going and roughly calculating the distance in my head. So 600 to 1200, that's about 600. So I will set that to 600 like that. So let's see if he can move more than 600 units. There we go. Test succeeded, the player moved. Automated testing. But that's all well and good, but it's a bit basic, isn't it? So let's advance it some more. Let's do some more automated testing that can really push it. So now we know the player can move, we can test him to actually take over this cart. And then we can test if the cart can move. And this is obviously very specific to my game and if you've got this medical testing, but it shows the abilities of what you can do with automated testing. So let's make the player walk up to this specific location and tell him to take over the cart, to interact with it. Let's trigger it. So I'm going to come to my automated testing here, and I'll just make a duplication. I'll just duplicate it, and I'll call it FT can player take over enter vehicle. And we'll open it up. So now we have this. Can the player enter the vehicle? Let's drag it into our world just so we don't forget. Put it really anywhere. I don't really know why you have to add it to the map. I'm sure there's some reason I've not learnt yet. The character, let's just assign it to this guy over here. Boom. And we'll give him a bit more time. We'll keep him at 60 seconds to try and do this. So let's go back to can player enter a vehicle. So instead of the actor's location, we don't need to store that anymore, so we can get rid of it. But instead, we need him to walk to the cart. So there are two ways you can do it. You can either just keep adding movement input until he reaches the right location, or because we've dragged him in the world and we've told him not to have a player controller, he's technically got an AI controller. So if we run this one here, you can see he has got a basic player controller, which we should be able to take over and activate and tell him to go places. So because he is spawned with an AI controller, and we've already tested the fact that he can move with keyboard input, I'm just going to use his AI controller to say, go to this location. So I'm going to grab my character here, and I'm going to drag off and do get controller. And then when the test starts, I'm simply going to tell him, go to this cart here. Or in my case, I want him to stand just behind the cart. So I'm going to come in and add a target point here. And I'll drag it up slightly, just enough where I know he can actually stand in front to be able to interact with it. Is it good enough distance? And I'll give this a unique tag so we can move it around at any point we want. And I will call it in front of cart. So I'll copy this tag. I'll go back to my functional test, drag off of here, and do get all actors of class with tag. The class will be my target point, and the tag will be in front of cart. I can then get off of this actor. I can get the actor location, and then with the controller, I can simply drag off and say, simple move to location, and plug the goal into it like so. And then I can actually delete all of this tick stuff down here. I'll keep the finished task as a remembrance to do it. But if we compile and save now, one last thing I do need to do is just to add a nav mesh into here. Like so. So I'll just stretch it out because his AI controller, he will need to walk on the floor. So you can see all good. Double check we've set everything on the test here. Yep, we have. So if I go to my session front end, click refresh, and then you can find your test, so enter vehicle. If I click the run, you will see it will load up, and he will run to the target point we've set, just like that. And remember, this one isn't about testing his movement, that's what the other one was. We need to take over that cart there. So now that we've got it moving to a location, we need to figure out how to tell it, firstly when it arrives, and then secondly how to actually interact with it. There's a couple of ways we can do this. We can spawn a trigger in and allocate when it's hit it. We can do a distance check to see when they've got there. We could allocate them to the AI controller and then unpossess them to the player controller. For me, what I'm going to do is very simply, I'm just going to add a trigger point just in this target point location here, a nice big trigger, and when the player hits it, then we know they've arrived at the destination. So after this, I'm just going to spawn actor from class. I'll add in a box trigger, or a trigger box. The spawn transform, let's just come and add one in here so we can replicate it. So we'll look for a trigger box. I want to set the location of the trigger box to the same as the one there. And whilst that will probably do, I am going to come in and increase the box extent just so we've got more wiggle room to play with. So I'm going to set it to a 40, 100, 100, just like that. So I'm going to come and set the scale on the Y just to be a bit bigger. And so 3, maybe 3. Yeah, just so we've got more room, just in case anything happens, he drifts off ever so slightly. You can hit this, which is fine. So I will copy that location. Or rather, I'll just get the location from the tag up here. I'll put it into there. I'll make sure I set the scale to 3 by 3 by 3. And I'll say always spawn like so. And then from here, I can drag off and do assign on actor begin overlap, which is basically the same function you'd normally run if you created a custom trigger. If the overlapped actor equals the character, then we are aware that this character has successfully ran into the target point. So we can grab this trigger box and we can just do destroy actor like so. We could probably tidy this up, but let's just get on with it for now. And then when they've arrived at it, we can then technically get the character's controller, and then we can see if we can call begin interact. Now it does kind of go multiple ways with this. It's a two-sided coin. On one way, if you're writing functional tests for everything, it causes you to write your game in a way that is testable. Otherwise, you're kind of failing the point of writing functional tests. But equally, it can be very annoying sometimes when something just doesn't work right. Any other thing we need to do is just connect the other actor to here instead of overlapped actor. Overlapped actor is the actual trigger box. But from this, we should be able to test it. So you can see if I come in and I run it now, you can see the character walk forwards. Oh, and it's took over it. We are in control of it, oddly, which we will need to disable because that won't allow the test to succeed. But we have successfully taken over the cart. As you can see, the test kind of succeeded. We've took over it. We just need to make sure, can we move it? And then we can go from there. So if I come back into here, what I'm going to do is create a new variable called cart. It'll be a type of pawn because that's what my cart is. And then once we begin interacting with it, on tick, all I'm going to do, just fake away, is I'm going to get the cart and I'm going to tell it to add movement input. And I'll just tell it to drive the same direction as the player, was 100 on the x-axis, I believe. And then we can pretty much come and copy the location code we did here to finish it. So if I delete the finish off and paste it after here, we're getting the character's location, but we want the cart. We're going to get the cart starting position, which we will sort in a moment. So I'll just promote that to a variable. And then from the branch, we can connect it back across. So it'll constantly be checking if the cart can move or trying to move it. It'll check if it's moved it past a certain point. If it has, it will succeed at saying the cart moved. Now, the only other thing we need to do is get the cart starting position. So inside prepare test, we will drag cart in, get actor location, then we will simply set the starting position like so. And this is a nice basic test, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see if it works. So if we run it now, the player should run up, it should tick over it, the cart should move itself. So if we actually allocate the cart to the test, otherwise it's not going to work at all. If we now run it this time, you will see the player runs up, he takes over the cart walks, the test succeeds. How cool is that, ladies and gentlemen? Errors I'm getting here are just because of things are expected to run when it doesn't. So for example, on the player controller at the very top, for the cart, it's assuming that I have a HUD and stuff like that. I don't need to worry about that for now. But the test did indeed succeed, ladies and gentlemen. So now we have two tests in our world. A test where the character can walk up, and then another test where the character can take over the cart. Two equally good tests. And there are thousands of tests you can do in your game. I'm not saying you should do thousands. The whole testing architecture, design principles, they go into way deeper than I'm ever going to go into in these tutorials. But test the most common functionality in your game, or the things that will break the most, and then you can always be told when they're going to be broken, and you can fix it. Automated testing is a huge thing in games, and in most things. If you can add some good ones into your game, you can prevent a lot of bugs going out to users. Imagine all those games you've played where you are supposed to be able to talk to an NPC, but the NPC's dead, and it's a core part of the game. Automated testing would have caught that and fixed it. And there we go, ladies and gentlemen. We now can tick as many tests as we create. We can create so many tests. We can run it, and you can see I can browse the player taking over the cart. The test will succeed, and then the second test will load up, and the player will just simply move. And there we go. Both tests have successfully passed. It tells you how long it took to run. Testing is a whole thing of itself. You're not going to be expected to understand it in one lesson. You need to load it up, you need to try, you need to figure out how it works. In some cases, you very well might have to add little workarounds to make it work. So for example, on my player controller, for my testing mannequin, you can see I've got these two interface functions here that simply bypass the interact function and go to there. Because that's what I needed to do to make the testing work. But this is also a great thing for the future if I ever want to force the player to interact with something. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. Automated testing. What do you think? It's very, very useful to catch bugs, and it can help you really improve your game. So in here, here's my I Am Reich game again, and you can see I've got a bunch of different tests here. I've got some tests over here, and I've got trigger points everywhere. So all these different tests, some of them are to make him move up to here and will complete. Some of them make him walk up to here, rotate and walk down here. So you can test rotation. Some of them test if he can take damage. Some of them test if he can die. Some of them test if it can jump with an ability, without an ability, and they'll grant abilities to check if it's working. If I ended up pushing it more, I'd test if they can kill the enemy, if they can do all sorts. A quick weapon, reload, you can do loads of stuff like that. And it's all the exact same way we've been doing it. So if I open up the project here and go to functional tests, here, let's pick the player death. Let's pick that one. So I'll click on that, I'll click run, you'll see it'll pop up. You can see I start up here. The character will run forwards, he'll hit this trigger point, he'll stop, he'll turn sideways, he'll then run forwards again. There was something off with the turning, I don't know why, so he runs kind of diagonal, which is that wall there. But you can see, I've sped time up to make him shoot, and then when the player dies, test succeeded, there we go. And that is all using the stuff that we've just done, just with little extra steps. So over here, when I hit this trigger point here, I tell this AI to detect the player, tell it to start attacking. I set the world's time up, by 10 or something, so he rapidly shoots me faster so I don't have to wait for it as long. And yeah, that's all there, ladies and gentlemen. Automated tests. Thanks for watching, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've enjoyed. If you've got any examples of automated tests you like to run or what you'd like to see next, please let me know below. My name is Decryption, and I will see you next time.